Tom and June, I hope you're listening. And was he funny walking in with his Michael Jackson? He had some hernia surgery, so he was kind of
I wondered what happened to him.
Yeah,
He didn't
walking
look as
appropriately.
good as
But he
thought.
had it on Wednesday, and here he's in church on Sunday, which is
wonderful.
admirable. But you know what? He's gonna pay for it. I bet he might not be here this Sunday.
We'll see. And I want to thank Cindy and Elaine for visiting me at Village on the Isle last week. I did a program, and of course I would do it again if anybody seemed interested. It was an hour presentation on a recap of Jonah, the book of Jonah, which is very interesting because it's very important in all three monotheistic religions. It's, of course, in the prophets and Torah. It's also in the New Testament, all over the place, the sign of Jonah in Luke and Matthew particularly. And of course, Jonah's in the Quran, very, very popular. And I always said it's probably because he was such a bad Jew and such a bad Christian, you know, that they let him in the Quran.
Really Christians then?
Oh, very, very Christian. Jonah is a Christian prophet. He's the foreshadowing of Jesus. That's the whole point. And that's,
But he wasn't Christian.
oh, hell no. But if you talk to people, they will tell you, well, of course he was. That's why he's there. You know, he's a foreshadowing of Jesus. So that's replacement theology. That's taking out of the context and putting him into thousands of years later. But I just quickly, when asked to describe the marks of the church, Martin Luther named Scripture, number one, first identifying mark in the church. And here we are in church, in the Word, because of God's grace. So important to me, so good to see you. And our Parsha today is only one chapter, and I doubt we're going to get through the whole thing, because you know me, right? But it's absolutely pivotal Parsha that continues to impact the community of faith even today. We're going to read about the Seder. I know, Erica, you said you attended several Seders. I don't know anybody else. If you haven't been, it's a ritual celebration of Passover that gets its roots right here in this particular chapter. And we'll be referring to this chapter and the consequent chapters that deal with the book of Exodus and getting through the wilderness to the Seder table until we get all the way through the book of Deuteronomy. And I've been back in the book of Deuteronomy because I'm preaching on it this Sunday. Wonderful. Anyway, Seder in Hebrew means order or arrangement. And it's very appropriate because Seder and this whole holiday of Passover is meant to be celebrated exactly the same way every year. And I'm just wondering if we do that at home. We do it a little bit liturgically. You know, we change it culturally. But basically, we don't really change in our home. We all have very particular, your Sunday dinner might be ham, yours might be turkey, and you know, whatever it happened to be. So it's not just a tradition like grandma's, what does she make, those green bean casseroles, isn't it?
Sweet potato casserole.
But that Passover celebration is much more of a commandment than it is a tradition. And the essential elements of the Seder are designed exactly to tell the story that we're reading now. So it has three sort of fundamental patterns of participation. And the very first one, we'll talk about this all the time, family. Family, getting people out of the temple and at their dining room table. That's what Torah did, and hopefully that's what we do. We take people from this table right into our dining room and into our kitchen. And then, of course, the individual, you pray yourself. And then, of course, the nation. We kind of build ourselves, form ourselves after what God teaches us. And it's very important that the Seder takes place in the home, not in the synagogue or in the temple. Whoops. And everyone is at home, gathered around the table. You could be guests, you could be a host, and everyone at that table is meant to feel exactly like a slave. You're meant to feel. So there's a whole script for Seder, and it's called a Haggadah, And we'll go through it when the time comes. I would love to do a little Seder here, one day. It's great fun. Told exactly the same way. They can be very elaborately illustrated, or they can be very plain, but lots of physical elements on the Seder table, which is in front of everyone, like wine, always wine. It's very interesting. Wine is always served at Jewish celebrations, and particularly the Hasidim, but Jews particularly, lowest rate of alcoholism. And they even give wine to the kids, drink.
They do in France too, when we
Yeah.
were there. Little kids would come at lunch and be drinking wine.
Yeah,
Well,
but there are
we
plenty
always
of,
did at holidays at our family. Even when I was 7, 8, 9, if I wanted some, I could have a little.
yeah.
Because my parents believed that if it was forbidden, it would be attractive. And if it was not, if he taught us to hate it when we were young, we would probably
Yeah,
not like it very
that
much.
whole thing right there. So there's always an extra glass of wine on the Seder table, and lots of ritual reminders of this story that we're reading, like a lamb shake bone, and an egg, which is usually roasted, and lots of ground horseradish, and parsley, and chopped apples and nuts, flavored with cinnamon and honey. And all of these things are on that table because what we're about to read, the things that we're reading about now. So let's think back to our story. Egypt was a superpower of the whole world, and then it was reduced, boom, almost to rubble, a place with no future by those 10 plagues. And soon after the 10th plague, very soon after, the Hebrew slaves begin their journey to freedom. And that's the story of the Exodus, epic. And we'll continue to see that it's very, very personal for people, and it's filled with everyday kinds of moments that you'll recognize even today. And we'll see that the Exodus was told this way on purpose. And it was to make everyday people feel that they are in fact a part of that story. It didn't just happen to them, it happened to us too. So in a sense, that's our story too. So how is this story told at the Seder? Asking questions, answering questions, and that's one thing that Torah teaches. We are never to stop asking questions. And we need to teach our kids, never stop asking, never stop questioning. And that sounds very tricky, right? Because doesn't that mean that they're questioning their belief, what we tell them? But no, say the rabbis, it is our religious duty to teach children to ask questions, which is exactly how Martin Luther wrote the catechism, the small catechism. What did he write in every single chapter? On almost every page it is written, was ist das? What is this? Why do we do this? Why do we say this? So it's not just learning to ask good questions. It's not just listening and obeying. It's thinking about what we just heard and what we just read and what we just learned. And that goes double for this class. I am hoping that you will continue to share with me. Let's get through this and let's deal with that, and maybe these linguistic questions, or all kinds of interesting questions. Now, I think it's very interesting that in the Hebrew language, there is no word that means obey. Fascinating, right? The closest that we can find to obey is the Shema. Now, I don't know if you know the Shema. It's like one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. It's probably the most beautiful prayer. It's in Deuteronomy, and it goes like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And that's the beginning of the Shema. So it doesn't have an exact definition in English because it means listen and hear, and open your ears and respond and try to understand what God is trying to tell you. And we're not created to be those members of the Light Brigade. Remember that poem? Didn't you hate that poem? Theirs is not to reason why, right? Theirs is to do or die, right? Oh, I hated that. But do you buy that Martin Luther wouldn't buy that, and neither would the rabbis. They all say to us, and we should say to our children, God gave you a brain. Use it to understand, to discern, get educated, and learn. And this is what God is telling the Israelites in our Parsha today. Hey, hang on to this memory of this moment for your children. Encourage them to ask questions and gather and investigate and explore and exegete. And this is yet another answer to our forever question. Why are we studying this long book of Torah? Well, we study it so that we can teach our children about freedom and slavery and about intellectual freedom and freedom of the mind and the soul. And as the rabbis say, Torah teaches, fear no question. I just love that. Fear no question. So let's get to the text for today. Ready? Exodus 12. And we can see that it's a composite text. So you can hear all the different writers talking. One is talking about immediate concerns, like how to get ready to get out of town with your head still attached to your shoulders, right? And then you can hear another writer who's writing about long-range concerns for the future of the nation, like what will matter to us in the future, like the calendar. Who ever thought the calendar? Did you notice that when you read this chapter? The Exodus is seen as the start of something big, something new. So the calendar is actually reconfigured to reflect and reinforce this by renumbering the months of the year to the month of the Exodus. Now the first month of the year is usually renamed the month Aviv, which means when the barley ripens. And we know this happens in the spring. Barley ripens in March or April. So Aviv is always a spring month. Well, Aviv here is named Nisan. See that? Which means month of spring. And this is the first month of the Hebrew calendar, where God takes the Israelites out of Egypt in the spring when it's not too hot, not too cold. And the Passover celebration begins on the 15th day of the month of Nisan. And it's interesting, I think, because Nisan is a very popular name for, a Hebrew name for boys. I just wouldn't think, I guess it's like Augustus or something.
Really, I've never heard it.
Yeah, but you don't know a lot of Jews in Israel either. It's a very popular name in Israel.
Oh, in Israel,
Yeah.
okay. I know a lot of Jews, so I know a lot of Jews, but I never heard it as an American Jewish name.
Oh, right. Oh, it's not an American, right. So, back to the calendar. The Hebrew calendar is lunar. Now, I don't know how good you guys are about this, but this took me a long time to get. The moon revolves around the earth once every 29 and a half days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Approximately. So today, we have a Hebrew calendar that is actually lunisolar. Okay, it's lunar to mark the months, but it's solar to mark the year, and then it gets really complicated. And it adds an extra lunar month every 2 to 3 years, since solar years can't be divided into lunar months, and it's going right over my head as I'm trying to teach you this. So just so you know, our calendar, what one do we use? Gregorian. We use the Gregorian calendar because of Pope Gregory, right? Totally a solar calendar. And the Muslim calendar is a totally lunar calendar. So that's why Ramadan can be in the spring or it can be in the fall, because it doesn't follow
And
that
twice
same.
a year on
Exactly.
occasion.
Yes, exactly. But now back to our text. So, according to our Parsha, the calendar commandment in Exodus 12 is the first commandment or mitzvah that the Jews received as a nation. So we can say that the calendar for many is not just astrological, it's theological, and it's not only scientific, it's also scriptural. And I remember having a professor that said the whole thing just has to do with the calendar. The Catholics fought the Protestants about when to begin this and when to stop the Easter service and when Lent really stops, and they've been fighting about this forever. But God tells Moses, this time of leaving is a renewal of the people. They're going from slave to free. So God shows Moses the renewal of the moon. There was darkness, but now there is a sliver of the moon. So now you know it's new. And did you know that the sky can speak to you? So that you can learn how to recognize the newness of the moon. Have you ever tried this? Go out and look at the moon? It was too small last night, I couldn't do it. But every night, go out and look at the moon. And if the light is on the right-hand side of the moon, then you know it's getting brighter. That's how you know that the moon is waxing, getting bigger. It's not waning, getting smaller. And there are 4 quarters of the moon. So you will always know where you are in the month just by looking at the moon. And of course, there were people who did this, right? So when was the last time you looked up the moon and said, oh, new moon, little moon?
Actually, I noticed it.
What did you notice? The last night was so tight.
Well, I didn't go last night, but when I went out walking the dog, I especially noticed the blue moon and the harvest moons and the big ones when they're really bright. But then I also do the new moon, because it's just a little sliver.
Little sliver, yep. But now I know what you all are sitting there saying. Surely, God did not change the workings of the universe just for the Exodus story, right? The moon and the sun still do what they've always been doing since God created them in Genesis. So why is there all this talk in Torah about commandments dealing with days and months and years? So let's go back just a little bit to the science. Natural astrological science. Once again, way over my head, very complicated for me. But even I can see that the days and the months have natural beginnings, right? Sun comes up, day. Sun goes down, day ends. Same for months and the moon. The moon waxes and then it wanes. 1 month. But years, now that's different. They don't really have visible natural beginnings or ends, right? You can't tell it's December 31st or something by looking at the sky. So
But you can by the weather oftentimes.
depending.
But
If you're
you
on
never
that,
could
if you're on that
It could
continent,
be
you know, that.
December, January,
Exactly.
February.
But
Can't tell here.
rabbis say God is assigning time laws for the people. Now remember, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, right? They were slaves for over 400 years. So, when did you go to work? You went to work when the slave master told you to go to work. And you started work when he told you, not by the sun. You didn't get up and, so when did you stop working? Not when the sun went down, but rather when the master told you to stop. And that's why we make all these jokes. I don't know if you know, black people's time. Yeah, if you've heard that somebody's always late, or Asian Indian, so that was like huge. Well, because of the Raj, right? The Englishmen were there to tell the people when to start, when to stop working. They didn't follow the clock because they were told when to stop working. But now, God is telling them, remember this time, this month, this day, this is new time. This is the time of your freedom. And for those of us, thank you God, who have never known slavery, this is the time to remember what God has done. He has freed his people. So the message is not scientific, it's theological and it's religious and it's political. God is telling the people who is in charge. I'm in charge, he says, not the slave master, not the chief, not the king, not the pope, not the prime minister, not even the president. God is. So the calendar becomes a symbol of God's power. Now, can you see that sort of happening? You can see the rabbi saying that. I don't know if you feel that way. Popes did it like crazy.
Did what?
Change the calendar.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Gregorian.
So, of course, we have been made very aware of God's power in our reading of Exodus. And this story is just one big giant power story. And our Parsha today interrupts the most powerful plague story, the 10th one. Horrible, right? Firstborns. And our writer interrupts this last plague to tell another story, which is the Exodus, which is told here as a preparation story, getting ready to be freed, liberated, delivered from evil, the evil of slavery. That's why these passages in Exodus, Moses is right up there in a lot of African American churches with Jesus, and right up, oh man, way past Paul, yeah, because he is the liberator. He led his people out of slavery. And notice, as we read the story, the shift from the Pharaoh in Egypt to Moses and the Israelites, and the liberation is made possible by the terrors of that accumulated 10 plagues. And remember, we talked about this. Pharaoh not only says, okay, you can get out, he actually ushers them out. He's so upset that they're still here. Follow me, just leave in the middle of the night. And remember, God said he would do this. Pharaoh would do this with this plague at midnight. And look for repetitions in the story, because that's what we always see with multiple stories combined. We hear a lot from my favorite writer, Jay, and we also hear about the editor, who was called D, which is short for Deuteronomistic writer, and the redactors. But now let's get started. Huge endeavor, terrible plague, taking place all around the Israelites, and it's a plague of death. And they're scared almost to death. So God tells Moses to give the people very, very specific instructions, detailed, which, say the rabbis, are meant to calm the people. Torah teaches that people need specific action-oriented advice during periods of high anxiety, right? We do that all the time. We say, all right, take a deep breath. Now remember, this is how you get out of a burning building, and this is how you get out of a car. Take off your seatbelt and blah, blah. We need very specific oriented advice. And that's another reason to study the Old Testament, right? It's not old at all. It's actually timeless. So let's look at what God tells Moses to tell the people while they're still in Egypt. Now we're in verse 2. This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months of the year. Gather everyone and tell them, on the 10th of this month, each family shall take a lamb, one lamb to each household. But if the household is too small to eat a whole lamb, then let them share with their neighbors who are closest to them. And you shall apportion the lamb according to what each person should eat. And your lamb, of course, has to be without blemish. It can't be, it has to be a male, has to be under a year old. And you can take it from sheep or goats if you have to. But the animal can be a kid as long as it's suitable for sacrifice. No damage to it. Now in verse 6, and tell the people that you shall keep watch over the lamb or kid until the 14th day of the month. And then all of you, whole community, shall slaughter the lambs at the same time at twilight. And do you know the story of the Hajj? And there's the giant slaughter at the end of the Hajj. With
I don't know what the Hajj is. So.
The Hajj is the yearly pilgrimage to Mecca that you are required to complete once in your lifetime if you're a Muslim. And this is exactly where they get it from. At one time, the whole planet slaughters their particular, of course you hire people to do it here, you can't do it yourself. And the meat is sold to people who give it to the poor, that sort of thing.
But this run red with blood.
Say it again?
And the streets run red with blood.
Yeah, it's pretty, well, not now, but they do it just outside of Mecca. Very difficult to even. So what did we just learn from this? we read the calendar announcement. Now, a new month will mark the beginning of the year, and scholars say that this shows us that there used to be a competing calendar system, a competing festival that was taking place at the same time. So what we learn is that this festival was to take place in the home, not in the temple, not in the synagogue, not in the little meeting places. This is a domestic celebration. And later we know that this changes. Now, in the days when Jesus was alive, remember when he and his mom and dad drag into Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival for the Passover, and Jesus gets lost for 3 days? That's the festival that we're talking about here. So it went from a domestic celebration back to a pilgrimage festival when the temple was still open, and then it went back to domestic again. All the families.
But wasn't it though that you pilgrimaged to the place you were from?
Mm-mm.
No?
That's for voting.
No, you had to go to the temple.
Oh.
That was for taxes, weren't they going to?
Well, that was two different stories,
Yeah.
depending on who you
Yeah.
listened to,
Yeah.
why they went to Egypt, yeah.
Yeah.
But, now, do you wonder, anyway, that's why they were in Jerusalem. That's why Jesus and Mary and Joseph were there for those days.
For the Passover festival.
But did you wonder why God talks about the size of the household around verse 4? You know, he talks about how many people are in your house. So each family, or mishpacha, like us, had to be big enough to eat a whole lamb. There had to be enough people to polish off the whole thing, because no leftovers.
Nothing left over.
Nothing left over. And that's very important. The animal had to be eaten. It must be suitable for sacrifice. Can't be blemished or lame.
Why is that? Is it because they didn't have refrigeration, or what?
A lot of people say that, and a lot of people say that part of it had to be burned for burnt offering for God.
That's what it said,
But
in
also
the
they
morning,
were gonna
if
do
there's anything
meeting.
left over in the morning,
Has to be
it
burned.
has to be burned, you shall
Yeah.
burn.
And so each mishpacha chooses a lamb from the flock, and then they sort of protect it, right? They keep it, watching it until they slaughter it in verse 7. And then they take some of that blood there, and they put it on their doorposts and their lintel, you know, sort of up the top and all around.
Just
Where
like
they-
in Cecil Beebe Mills.
Yeah,
they
that,
painted
where they're
the
going to
window
eat the
With
lamb.
the hyssop, with the,
And we know that top
Herbs.
piece, that lintel, but
lintel.
that's the horizontal bar that connects the two doorposts, and that blood. And remember, that blood, the ancients believed blood represents the essence of life, right? And the rabbis teach that the doorways are also very symbolic. They represent the sacred Israelite interior. And I'm preaching about this Sunday, the inside. You know, the inside of the Israelite home versus the profane world of the Egyptians on the outside.
And that's why even to this day, Jews have a mezuzah that they protect them on the
Yep.
front of their door.
Well, I have a mezuzah. Do some people have a cross? Do you have a cross on your house?
I do.
In my house.
Not on the door.
I have it above the door.
Yeah, a lot of people have. Yeah, Hannah was showing us, like certain numbers that she has to write in certain days. And that used to be in medieval tradition in Europe. You had to write these numbers to show that you were a member of this community. Interesting.
You need to write a number on on your door.
Yeah, it's a passage. Very interesting. She's so interesting. I want to sit her down and tape her, right?
Oh.
Write down her life story.
Exactly. So sometimes, and I think that we can relate to that, when you get home after a really busy day, right? You come into your house and you close the door behind you. Can't you just feel that sacred space? You know, this is my space. I'm home. I'm inside.
It's safe.
Yeah.
It's a safe space.
Yes, safe space. But why do the Israelites have to smear blood all over the doorways, right? And we're going to talk about this a lot. But for now, the rabbis say, God just needs to know where you live.
It was a mark so that the angel of death would pass them by. That's what they say.
Yeah, but there's really no angel of death.
Don't you think God knows where they live?
Don't you think he knows? He
I-
knows how
he
many
knows
people are in
everything.
there. Who knows?
He knows
I-
what
Well,
he
according to
wears around
Sesame,
your
the
head.
builder was an angel of death.
Seriously, I gotta see, we're gonna see this
You
movie
really do
together.
need to see this.
We've gotta see it. All right, go to verse 8.
I tell you, that's the spookiest part of that movie. In fact, that's one of the, as a child, that was probably the scariest movie I ever saw because
Really?
at that point, that part of it, because that was scared me more than flying monkeys or any of the rest, because the rest of that I could know was fiction, even as a child. But the angel of death, because they had this sort of like black smoke
Yeah, it was
that
like a smoke that goes over that door.
that went around and through the
Oh my
community.
And it went through
And it-
doors where
And it was like Halloweenish,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the music was real eerie, and it went up, and then when it came and it passed up, went up over where it saw the lentils with blood, and then it passed by, and then then it would go into another home and you'd hear, because somebody was dead, right?
So
Ten
it was
Commandments?
androgynous, you couldn't tell if it was male or female.
No, it was just it was like a spirit, like a ghostly spirit, like black smoke, kind of, but
It's kind of a black gray.
it was very, I mean,
Terrifying.
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 And especially with the,
Maybe for a kid.
when it
but I
passed
knew
by, it
what
would
the story
terrify,
was.
because it would go into a doorway, through a doorway that didn't have blood on it, and then you'd hear this blood-curdling scream because the
The
eldest son,
baby was crying.
well, the eldest son was dead. Because the eldest son, no matter how old they were, if the eldest son was 85 years old, the eldest son died, right?
Oh my God. All right, look at verse 8, let's get away from this spooky guy.
That's Cecil.
Yeah. Now God tells Moses to tell the people, you shall eat the flesh of the lamb that same night, and you shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Blah, blah. And God's adamant about this. Do not eat the meat raw, and do not eat it cooked in water, so you can't boil it. And eat it roasted on an open fire.
Including
That
the
tastes
head.
so good.
Right? And
It
each
sounds
family
good.
has to eat the entire animal, the head, the legs, the innards, all roasted. And you can't leave any of it until morning. If there are any leftovers, you have to burn them. That's a korban to give to God, right?
And the internal organs, mine says.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
that
heard
too.
A lot of people eat liver and stuff like
Well,
that.
that's
I mean,
true.
I
It's
know.
not my thing.
But not
So
stomach.
God is actually giving the Israelites cooking instructions here, right? And we know that the kosher diet prohibits blood under any circumstances. It's life's essence. You can't ingest blood. So why can't you cook the lamb in water, right? Why is that? Why can't you just put it on with a couple of spices? Well, say the rabbis, there's a million reasons. Roasting is the oldest form of cooking, and since the Israelites are going on a trip back to their roots, this is a symbolic message of the olden days. But a more practical explanation is that the Israelites, they didn't have time to whip out their pots and their pans for all of them to cook all those lambs at the same time, right? So just toss the meat on the fire, on the grill. Maybe, right?
Well,
But the
well, it- part- I
sacrifice
mean, the
is
whole-
like that,
The
though.
whole point of it, though, is that it was supposed to be fast, because the rest of it says you'll wear it with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you eat it hurriedly. So it's like you're doing all this stuff is fast, and
Right.
it gets cooked faster over an open
Right.
fire than
Cooking.
it does because you have to wait for the water to boil and all that other stuff. It takes longer to simmer
I
meat in
think
a
so.
stew.
That makes
But wait a minute.
sense.
It'll taste better.
If you were having a sacrifice to God back in these days, you didn't boil it,
No, yeah, you didn't boil
so
it,
it's a
yeah.
sacrifice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It
So
is.
that kind of gives you the answer
Absolutely
right
right.
there, you know?
So here's how you have to eat it, and Erica just referenced this. First, you have to gird your loins, which is wrap that tunic up between your legs, tie it with a belt or stick it into your belt, and then put your sandals on your feet. Take your staff in your hand, and then eat the lamb really fast. You have to gobble, because it is a Passover offering to the Lord. So, here's the story about girding your loins, which sounds very strange, but not strange at all, say the rabbis. People wore those long, kind of capey things, And they were belted at the waist with a sash. So if you were working all day in the fields or in the city, in the streets, all that fabric would get into your way. So to make it less difficult to maneuver, when God says, gird your loins, here's what you do. I used to have a kid get up and do this. It was like so fun, Sunday school. Grab the garment in the front and ball it up, okay? And then you pass it between your legs, and then you divide the garment into two parts, and you tuck these into the sash at your waist. So you don't have all that stuff from the knee down, all
Yeah,
that
looks like
flowing.
you've got
You make a
pants
big,
on.
like a big diaper.
Right. And you better put your shoes on, because you're not gonna have time to look for them. And get ready to roll. Same reason for you to hold your staff, because you won't have time to look for it, because time is of the essence. And look at verse 12. That night, this is terrifying, I will go through the land of Egypt, and I will strike down every firstborn in Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord, will do this. So we know what killed the firstborn means, which is horrible. But what is God saying about Egyptian gods? And I will mete out punishments to them, right? What does this have? Well, God is talking about the idols. He intends to smash and destroy every one of them. And notice that God is very anthropomorphic here, right? He's like a person, he's like a human, and he's stomping through the land. Very frightening. But God tells them, don't worry. Look at verse 13. Because the blood on your houses in which you dwell shall be a sign for you. And when I see the blood, I'll pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So blood. This blood is a sign of your faith and obedience, and a blessed assurance that no harm will come to you. So do you sound assured? Do you feel, I don't feel very good about this. So does this sound like God that you can imagine? Is God a savior, or is he a destroyer?
Both.
And we ask this a lot, and I'm not sure we ever answer it the same way twice, right? It depends, like you just said. But now, God
The answer
gives
is yes.
Moses.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the answer is yes.
It's both.
Yes, he's both, exactly. Now God gives Moses the plans for the Passover. This day shall be to you one of remembrance for future generations. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages, and you shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. So far, God has told the Israelites when to do it. Now God continues with the how to do it. Look at verse 15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your house. Leaven is yeast. In Hebrew it's called chametz. And it's very important instruction. Carries very serious consequences if it's not carried out. Whoever eats leavened bread during these 7 days will be cut off from the community. They'll be cut out of the whole community. And this is serious, but what does it mean, being cut out of the community? And why is leaven not allowed, right? We're never told. We just know it will get you cut off.
But leavened bread
Takes
will
longer.
spoil, unleavened bread isn't gonna spoil.
Right,
Oh,
and it takes time for it to rise, so it's all about the time factor.
Time, but getting it out
And
of your
it-
house
and-
forever.
On the other
But
hand,
you're-
It's not forever, it's just for 7 days.
7 days, right, but why do you have to get it out forever?
but I think.
You don't have to get it out forever, no
For
one
7
says.
days,
Once a year, it's part of the Remembrance Festival. And
okay.
it's, again, it's part of the can you follow my rules kind of a thing.
When we get to Leviticus, you're gonna see that leaven is considered impure.
Oh.
No idea why.
Well, it's a
kind of-
bacteria.
Is it,
A growth-
exactly,
It's a
'cause it kind
bacteria.
of spoils, if you leave fruit to get leaven, so to speak, it turns into wine or something, right?
It's, well, leavening, I mean, it's a bacteria is what it is, that's what yeast is, it's a bacteria that
grows.
Grows.
Does wonders
Needs to
for
be fed.
bread.
Yeah.
You know, I was told years ago that anything, no, that most references and dictates that concerned food in the Bible was basically at that time to protect the people
I
from
know.
illness, disease,
But
et
that,
cetera.
but
A
that's
lot of-
very, very interesting,
They-
because
but
scholars today say absolutely not true.
Yeah.
Absolutely not true. That was kind of a reason, see, that's why we don't have to do it anymore. But it isn't a reason why. It has to do with what God told them to do.
Right, and
Showing faith
this has
and
nothing to
trust.
do with that.
Isn't that
It's,
interesting?
it's like, this was, what I think God is saying is that this is so important that it needs to be remembered, not just for one day a year, but for 7 days a year. You have to remember it
Absolutely.
for the whole of the week of Passover.
But it's interesting to me, when we talk about getting cut off from the community, and some scholars say what it actually means is exile, that you'll be exiled out of the community.
Like shunning in the Amish community.
Exactly. So it's almost like being exiled, right?
I think it's
Excommunicated.
kind of a way to prove your faith in God.
Yes.
He's
And,
saying, you know,
and
do these
other
things.
other
if you
scholars would
don't,
say, it's like dying early, before you had any children to leave behind you, you know, that sort of thing. A shortened lifespan. Or maybe it means you'll just be childish, so your name will be cut off because you'll have no progeny. It's just a very serious warning by God, or at least that's what Moses tells you, God tells you. And if you disobey, don't you dare blame that on God, because He's not cutting you out of anything. You're doing it to yourself. You're cutting yourself right out of the promises. So for your own sake and the sake of your future, matzah, matzah, matzah. No ifs, ands, or buts. So matzah, we all know matzah, right? It's terrible. I don't know why kids love it, but, oh, could I have some more of that? It's just awful,
They
right? It's
probably
not
put
even,
peanut butter on it or
right?
Nutella.
It's
It's
just
just a
flour.
flatbread, it's just a
Nutella
flatbread.
on
Yeah,
it.
it's not
cracker.
tasty. It's not what I would
Is it
call.
kind of like, what is
It's like wassa bread, only wassa bread
And it has to
has
come from a
wheat rye.
grain, like you were talking about, that does not ferment.
Yes.
Like, I have no idea what kind of grains don't ferment, you know,
That's
but it
true.
has to come. And there are,
maybe that's that rice we
Right.
didn't know what it was.
right?
Yeah.
And there are agencies staffed by rabbis, of course, whose job it is to go to all the places where this stuff is produced and check the machinery to make sure it didn't process anything else that might have leaven still on it, and that the packaging that it goes into. And if you could probably find
And it'll say that on the package. right?
yes,
Yeah.
and you'll probably
Well,
look there and find, in the front, you'll probably, sometimes it has a P, sometimes it has a
reference to
U, depending on
Kosher
what,
or something.
Up in the break-in.
For what?
Non-GMO project verified.
depending on what agency
that's-
certified that as kosher, I don't know
Oh,
what
I
it
see
is.
Does it
more
say
of
that it's
come,
kosher?
It
Passover time.
usually does, almost everything in our,
Really?
in our supermarkets do.
Yes,
I don't know about
Never
the
even
Midwest.
noticed it.
It's very interesting.
I don't see.
And now, I'll check. When we do our kosher thing,
That's a different.
it can make you
Yeah.
crazy.
All these,
Did you find it?
no, man.
I don't think it's not.
It'll be
necess-
more toward Passover, maybe?
No, always,
Always, okay.
now. Whoever buys that, like, there's
What's that little
certain,
green label in the upper corner? by the front of the thing?
Non-GMO,
Yeah, see, I see
project
that all the time,
verified.
non-GMO
what's on the
stuff.
back by the round thing? Is that what it says,
It's
non-GMO?
down on the round.
it just says, Aldi twice as nice guarantee,
Here, let me
item
see it.
replaced, money refunded. A multi-layer pouch.
I
how
might
to
tell you that it was
recycle
made in
info.
a factory that had leaven, it just depends.
Well,
Yeah,
diet soap.
maybe it's not kosher.
It's probably not,
For
yeah,
some
if it's
reason.
not, if it's not
It doesn't
listed.
have that on it. It
If
is
it's
a
not
kosher.
listed, then it's not been blessed by a rabbi to be kosher.
All right, so what we're supposed to be looking now, as we look through these texts, is did you hear two festivals that are sort of combined? And this is a scholarly consensus. There was once two different festivals at different times of the year. One was a pastoral animal sacrifice, and this is combined with an agricultural sacrifice, right? Matzah and lamb, which are brought together. And look at verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat the unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month, at evening, the eve of the 15th day of the month of Nisan. So no leaven shall be found in your house for 7 days, and whoever eats it, that I'm cut off from the whole assembly, whether he's a stranger, a sojourner, a citizen of the country. But what country? We are talking about this little bitty group, right, that's walking out of tiny little Egypt. How did we go to all of a sudden to a country? Well, you can see that the text literally jumps into the future, right, to a
It
different
doesn't say
time.
country, it just says in all your settlements, you shall eat unleavened bread. It doesn't say country.
In Hebrew, it says country, and we just joked about this, right? So does anybody else say anything else?
Keep this.
Whether
Must
he
be
is a
cut off from the community of Israel.
That's
community.
earlier. We're talking about, I brought your companies out of the land of Egypt, you shall observe this day throughout the generations of perpetual ordinance. In the first of the seventh day, forever eats this congregation off from the congregation of Israel, whether an
That's- oh,
alien or a
congregation,
native of the
that's
I
land.
have the
Definitely.
community of
Mine
Israel.
says the community.
Yeah,
Mine
mine
says
says
the
Nothing
community.
leavened in all your settlements, you shall eat unleavened bread.
So the text
And this says
here
wherever you live.
is not just talking
We're-
to the Hebrews getting ready to walk out of Egypt. The text here, say the rabbis, is telling the Israelites who are living in the cities sometime in the future that this is for you too. And the text is telling the readers, that'd be us, this text is for you too, whether you're a believer or whether you just live among believers. This text is for you. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your settlements, in all your congregations or communities. You shall eat unleavened bread, matzah. So now look at 21. Then Moses gathers all the elders, and he said to them, go and pick a lamb from your flocks, slaughter it, and then take a bunch of hyssop. Has anybody ever seen hyssop? Hyssop, a branch? And then dip the hyssop, it's from a bush, into the blood of the lamb that's in a basin, and then apply it to either side of your door and over the lintel.
Use it like a paintbrush.
Yep, and the next part is important. After you smear the blood, go inside and stay inside. None of you shall go outside your house until morning. And I thought it was very interesting because I wanted to see if we could buy hyssop here, through Amazon.com, which is where I buy all my biblical stuff for the kids. So I'm looking and it says hyssop doesn't grow in Egypt. You can't buy hyssop, so it must be. So what the rabbis say, that it's probably marjoram. But that I could figure out, just go out and get some marjoram, smear it on your door. But also, I thought interesting, the verb used here to describe smearing the blood. Smearing the blood. Very, very same word that describes, remember Zipporah, when she circumcised whoever she circumcised, his son or him. That's the verb that she used to smear the blood, right, on somebody's feet or genitals. We don't know exactly what she did, but the instruction is very clear. Smear it and get inside and stay inside, because when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians with that horrible black thing, he'll see the blood on the lintel and the post, and the Lord will pass over that door and will not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. Does it say smite?
Strike.
Strike you down.
Strike, interesting.
Will
Mine
not
says
allow the
kill you.
destroyer to
Smite
enter
you.
your houses
Will not.
and strike you down.
You down.
This
So,
is-
here we go. Word play again. The verb Passover, of course we know, becomes the name of the holiday. And Who is the destroyer, Erica?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Up here it said it was God gonna do it.
Right.
And down here it says God gonna do it, but then it also, even in my Lutheran Bible, it says,
Yeah.
the angel of death will pass
Right,
over the
right,
Israelite
right.
homes,
Who the
marked
heck
with
is
blood
that?
of lamb, and then that's just, you know, who is that? That's, and then it says that down here too, for the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintel and on 2 doorsteps, the Lord will pass over that, and will not allow the destroyer to enter your house to strike you down. So the Lord is passing you over, but there's the destroyer, which is
We hate her, him, it, that black stuff that comes.
well, yeah, but I think that the destroyer is God's alter ego. It's just
Right,
like, you know,
right. But it's interesting, rabbis say, many rabbis say, that the destroyer is actually death personified.
Yeah,
That's
death
what
personified.
it is, yeah. And now, more of the same. Ugh. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And this forms the strong, unbreakable link between generations. Everyone is part of this pivotal experience. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, like he promised, hence the name, the promised land, you shall observe this rite. And once again, did you notice that leap through time? You know, we have 40 years to get through this desert, and all of a sudden we're leaping when you enter into the promised land. So there's this hope of the future, right? Israelites are still in Egypt, but the writer, who was probably Jay, who writes around the time of Solomon, King David Solomon, and centuries later, right? She's writing about the promised land, and the leap continues. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this, Dad? What does this rite mean to you? Why do we do this? You shall say to them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and saved our houses. And now, here we go, the priestly writer finishes the text here. And the Israelites went and did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. And it's interesting, at the Seder table, still today, one of the children asks this question, why do we do this? Why do we do this? And be sure, this is not a rhetorical question. It's specifically designed to interpret the past in view of the present. This is your children sitting there, right? So now we read J again. We're at round 29. In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborns in the land of Egypt. And you don't think this scares that kid, no? But from the firstborn who sat on the throne to the firstborn captive who was in the dungeon, and all their cattle, no matter how high or how low. And rabbis say this is to infer that the entire Egyptian population was guilty, because they tolerated Pharaoh's dictatorship. And then Pharaoh got up in the night with all his courtiers and all the other Egyptians, because everybody was screaming, because there was no house where Egyptians lived where there was not someone dead. Pharaoh himself gets up to surrender, and Jay wants to make sure that you know every single Egyptian household was affected. And things are so bad in Egypt that the priestly writer wants to hurry things along to get the Israelites out of there. So we're around 31 now. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron and says, up, depart from my people, you and the Israelites with you. Take also your flocks and your herds. As you said, be gone. Finally, Pharaoh has acknowledged that God has dominion over him. Maybe his heart just thawed or something. And all the Egyptians urged the people, here we are in 33, to make them leave in haste. For they said, we shall all be dead. There's such a real sense of panic. So the Israelites took their dough, right? Took all their stuff before it was leavened, that hard dough. And then they took the dough in the kneading bowls. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. And they wrapped those bowls in their cloaks, and they carried the bowls on their shoulders. But clearly, weren't the Israelites totally unprepared for this, right? They were caught with unbaked dough, and they must have thought they had more time. So this is why people eat matzah on this day, to remember the hasty departure. But why do people today eat matzah for 7 days? It never says in our text. Or we're told, but it got lost somewhere. But-
Because God said to do it, that's why.
Right, but we're not told why. You know, we're not told why God said to do it.
Why the
You'll
7 days?
remember.
We're just
Yeah,
told
why
us-
7 days, why
7
not
days.
one?
Well, you'll remember better
But
if
why-
it's 7 days and one day, so you don't eat a sandwich. But
Right.
7 days,
Exactly.
nothing. No.
So, on their way out of Egypt, what did those little Israelites gather?
Everything.
Everything, objects of gold and silver and fancy clothing. They stripped the Egyptians. And notice, it's the first time in this chapter that clothing is mentioned. And the text seems to insist that these items, the gold and the silver and the fine fabrics, were given, not loaned, to the Israelites. And the Egyptians did this on purpose. And some say that Torah teaches the Egyptians wanted to send the Israelites off with expensive gifts so that you don't harbor resentments, because we kept you prisoners for 400 years. But later in Deuteronomy, we're going to read that the Israelites are clearly instructed not to hate the Egyptians. So that loot is supposed to cleanse the hatred. And we'll keep looking at that, how they kind of pay their way out of it. And the text says that the Egyptians really wanted to send the Israelites off laden with gifts so that they don't feel badly. And that might take more than some bracelets, right? Now in Deuteronomy, Torah teaches, you shall not hate the Egyptians, and no one should hold a memory of bitterness or hatred. And that's, I think, what we should still be teaching, right? So, the Israelites on the move, way out, text continues, we're at 37, Ramses to Succoth, and that's about 32 miles, very possible to make that. And then the text says, and I'm curious, does your text say 600,000 men on foot
Right.
left?
Besides
Not
women and
counting
children.
women.
Then
Besides
you add to
children.
that 600, women and children and the elderly and the sick, who were not on foot, they had to ride. And that would make up about 3 million people. Impossible, couldn't happen, right? So how do we explain this? Well,
You gotta see the
linguistically-
10 Commandments. It's
Exactly.
amazing how they did that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Some scholars say that 600 actually refers to the number of contingents, not the number of men. So each contingent is like 10 men or something. So even 6,000 men left, not 600,000. But we have to add to that number, because the Israelites were accompanied, and here we go, you're gonna hear about these for the next 40 years, the mixed multitude of people who walked out with them. It wasn't just the Jews.
And mine says, many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds.
Exactly, people who were in Egypt and wanted out. So they followed the Israelites right out. And sages say that this mixed multitude, nobody says mixed
Are they
multitude.
slaves, do you think?
Some of them were slaves that were let go, that followed
Some
the
of them were
Israelites out.
persecuted or something by the
Exactly, but
government.
some of them were just normal people, some of them were little devils,
Well,
you'll
it
see
just
later
says
on.
here, if an alien who resides with you wants to celebrate the Passover to the
Mhm.
Lord, all his males shall be circumcised. Then he may draw near to celebrate it. He
But
shall
what
be
about the
regarded
guys
as a
who
native
walked
of the
out?
land.
Who walked out? What is it called?
No uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law
Right,
for the
that's-
native and
that's
for the
for-
alien who resides among you.
Passover, but I'm just wondering, probably the people who walked out with the Israelites were people from the bottom rung of society, probably very rough about the edges, and you'll read about them as we go on. And they were very happy for their company on this Exodus. And this mixed multitude, you'll hear this a lot. They get blamed for almost everything the Israelites do wrong. The Israelites just turn around. So then they
Oh, it
stop.
wasn't us, it was those guys.
Yeah, it wasn't us, it wasn't me. So then they stop and they bake bread, and they took with them out of Egypt that they could not delay because they didn't bring any other provisions. and they clearly did not plan well. They had so long to get ready and they didn't. But others say this is very typical for slaves, right? Slaves live day by day, so they don't plan for the future because they have no life. They're told what they're going to do. And rabbis say they didn't prepare for the future because they are faithful believers in their God. They were willing to march into the desert without provisions, believing that God would provide for them. And now we're going to stop. And next week, we're going to pick up at the end of Exodus 12 here. I think that's around verse 40. And then we'll add to that 13 and 14. And this is all the priestly writer to explain the chronology and the calculations. Priestly writers, very specific. What you can, what you can't do. Eat this, can't eat that. Very, very priestly. They're giving the laws for the Israelites. The ger, G-E-R, that's a Hebrew word for foreigners, the ones who aren't circumcised yet, that kind of followed them out. They're not converted, but they're still welcome to celebrate the Passover, which is why I'm surprised to see that. I want to look at that. So that's us, right? We're ger, we're the ger. Even though our children are probably circumcised, because that was the law here, right? No, I think you have
It's
a
not
choice
law.
now.
It's not law. It's not law.
You have a choice.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Back in the
standard.
day, you didn't really have a big choice. Doctors just
Well,
grabbed the
doctors
baby.
recommended it,
Yeah.
but they don't now
No.
Yeah.
necessarily.
They say tomorrow we're gonna circumcise your
Wait till
son."
we get to that.
I said, no, you're not.
When we get to it, because there are societies
You didn't want your child to be circumcised?
No.
where men, like our 12-step, where they get together and they lament the fact that they were in fact snipped and clipped. And there are all kinds of ways to get that portion of the penis to come down. This sounds very painful, but you can even buy a kit. I looked it up on Amazon.com.
Buy a kit?
If you are
Oh, my
circumcised,
goodness.
but you don't want to.
Yes, like if you want to try, now you can go in and have reconstructive surgery. But if you want to try it, well, of course we can, but men could. Don't tell
It's
Tom,
hard to-
he
it's-
just had that terrible operation.
He's
Don't
got
mention
enough
it.
problems.
But,
Well, it's a
oh my
different part
God.
of the anatomy, but okay.
It's close.
All right, so we'll stop here.
Can I ask a
And-
question though?
Of course.
In verse 32, it said, "Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go, and also bless me."
Yeah.
Yes, that's what.
Yeah.
the
Yes,
Proverbs
because
says.
he's cursed. He
Yeah.
is absolutely cursed. And I didn't finish this, but I will get to it when we come back. I'll stop and pick it up here. Moses has to bless him because he is carrying his whole country on his back right now, so, absolutely. Absolutely.
Moses had to bless Pharaoh.
Right.
Yeah, Moses.
To remove the
The curse.
continuing curse, right?
Yep,
Wow.
yep. So interesting, as we read this, as you continue to read, see if you can find Jesus in there. This whole part that we're about to start. And, we talked about Jonah prefiguring Christ. Here we are, back in Exodus, prefiguring.
Well, the
blood,
the slaughter
blood
lamb,
of Christ,
the
right?
blood on the Christ.
On the,
Which a lot of Jews will say, hey, we got that first, we started that.
But that's
We
why
took that
he's
from
called
us."
the
The Lamb
Lamb,
of God.
like the Lamb of
course,
God.
the Lamb
yes.
of God.
That's right.
Of course,
Yeah,
John.
Sacrifice.
John, but here's what, I just love this. N.T. Wright, remember we talked about N.T. Wright, who was also an Anglican, just like Peter Gomes, the book you
Oh,
read.
okay.
Fascinating guy. And he says, tragically, the history of Christianity is littered with ways of reading the Bible which have muzzled the Bible. So we're not going to read about this. We're going to just pick this up and stick this in without seeing how it progressed over the years. And of course, the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is all over this Bible for Christians and for Jews. So interesting. I think we'll enjoy the next couple of verses. But get ready. God's going to turn himself into cloud and fire. and rescues them from a watery grave. And Shavua Tov, which means have a wonderful week. And text me any questions you have, and we'll talk about them in the beginning. Thank you so much. This was